Hey everyone, and welcome to another Deep Dive. You know how much we love getting into the nitty-gritty of pop culture. And today we're going to be taking a look at Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man specifically. We're going to be analyzing him through the lens of the Enneagram.
Oh,
And specifically Type 6, the Loyalist. So this should be really interesting.
yeah, definitely.
And we found this really fascinating in-depth analysis online. And so we're going to be using that as our source material for this deep dive.
Sounds good.
And it's a lot of information, so we're going to try to kind of extract the juiciest bits for our listeners today.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm excited to see what we uncover about why Spider-Man struggles resonate so deeply with audiences, and maybe we can even learn something about ourselves along the way through the Enneagram.
Right.
So yeah, can you give us a quick overview of the Enneagram and what it is and how it works for people who maybe aren't as familiar?
Sure. So the Enneagram is basically a personality typing system, and it's based on the idea that we all have these core motivations and fears that drive our behavior. And so
Mm,
by understanding our Enneagram type, we can start to understand these deeper patterns in ourselves and in others.
okay, cool. So then with Spider-Man in particular, we're looking at Type 6, which is
Yes.
the loyalist. So can you tell us a little bit about what defines that type?
Yeah, so type 6 individuals are driven by a need for security,
Yeah.
and they have a really strong fear of uncertainty and danger.
Hmm.
So they're constantly looking for ways to feel safe and to create stability in their lives.
And so does that kind of tie into the whole, the famous Spider-Man line, with great power comes great responsibility?
Yes, absolutely. I think that line perfectly encapsulates the core fear and the driving force behind a type 6, especially a social 6 like Spider-Man.
Okay, so then what makes a social 6 different from other types of 6s?
So social 6s, they look for security through their connections to others. They find safety in belonging to groups and communities and causes that they believe in.
So it's like finding security through, I don't know, duty and loyalty to something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. They're deeply loyal and committed, and they often put the needs of the group above their own.
Which I feel like we definitely see in Spider-Man, right? Like his whole thing is about protecting the city and the people he loves,
Right.
even if it means sacrificing his own happiness.
Right. And it's not just about physical safety either. They're also concerned with upholding their ideals and beliefs. They want to make sure that the things they value are protected.
So it's like that sense of responsibility comes from a place of fear almost.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fear of letting others down, a fear of failing to protect those they care about.
So it's almost like that line, with great power comes great responsibility, it takes on a whole new meaning when you look at it through that lens.
Totally. It's not just a superhero motto. It's a reflection of his deepest fear.
And it's interesting because that fear isn't just about fighting villains. It's like it affects every part of his life, his relationships, his decisions, his whole worldview.
Yeah, you see it in his reluctance to reveal his identity to Aunt May and Mary Jane. He's terrified of putting them in danger.
Right. It's like he's constantly battling with this inner conflict between wanting a normal life and feeling obligated to be Spider-Man.
Exactly. And for a social 6, loyalty is a double-edged sword. It gives them a sense of security and belonging, but it can also lead to a lot of internal struggle.
Yeah, like in Spider-Man 2, when he tries to give up being Spider-Man to be with Mary Jane, he clearly wants that connection with her, but ultimately his loyalty to his greater purpose wins out.
Right. It really highlights how complex the social 6 personality is. It's this constant push and pull between wanting safety and wanting to belong and also wanting to pursue their own individual needs.
So how does that play out in his other relationships, like with Aunt May and Harry Osborn?
Well, he's incredibly loyal to both of them, but he's also very aware of the potential risks involved in those relationships. He knows that his identity as Spider-Man could put them in danger, and that weighs heavily on him.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned earlier how social 6s are always scanning for threats.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about how Spider-Man is constantly having those nightmares about Uncle Ben's death. It's like that trauma is always there in the back of his mind, fueling his every action.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's like he's trapped in this cycle of fear and responsibility. He's trying to prevent that same tragedy from happening again, and that drives him to be hypervigilant and always on guard.
It also makes me think about his relationship with authority figures.
Mm.
Like, he seems to both respect them and distrust them at the same time.
Yeah, that's another classic social 6 trait. They value guidance and structure, but they're also wary of the flaws in authority. They know that even people in power can make mistakes, which just reinforces their anxiety.
So it's like he's constantly questioning everything, trying to figure out the best way to protect everyone. He's not just blindly following orders.
Exactly. He's always assessing the situation, weighing the risks, trying to find that balance between trusting authority and relying on his own judgment.
So we've got this fear, this intense responsibility, and this deep loyalty driving his actions. But how does that actually manifest in his approach to being Spider-Man?
Well, one way is through constant vigilance and preparation. Social sixes, they channel their fear into action. They're always trying to be one step ahead of potential threats, always prepared with a plan B, always thinking about the worst case scenario.
So they're the ones with the go bags and the emergency kits and the detailed evacuation plans.
Pretty much. And in Spider-Man's case, that manifests as constantly patrolling the city, even when there's no immediate danger. He's always on the lookout for trouble, always ready to jump into action.
Because like he can't relax because that fear is always simmering beneath the surface.
Exactly. And it can be exhausting. It's like they're always waiting for the other shoe to drop for the next crisis to erupt.
But does he ever find any moments of peace? Like, does he ever get to just be Peter Parker and let go of that Spider-Man persona?
He does find some solace in his relationships, especially with Aunt May and Mary Jane. Those connections ground him. They give him a sense of normalcy in the midst of all the chaos.
So those relationships are like his safe haven.
In a way, yes. They're a reminder of what he's fighting for. They give him a reason to keep going even when things get tough.
But even then, I imagine that fear is still lurking in the back of his mind.
It probably is. The fear never really goes away for a social six. It's part of their wiring. But what's important is how they choose to manage that fear.
And in Spider-Man's case, it seems like he's slowly learning to channel that fear into courage and compassion.
Exactly. He's not letting it control him. He's using it to fuel his mission to protect others.
So it's not about eradicating the fear, it's about transforming it into something positive.
Precisely. And that's a journey that I think a lot of us can relate to, regardless of our Enneagram type. We all have fears that hold us back, but it's about finding ways to confront those fears and use them to our advantage.
And maybe that's something we'll see more of in Spider-Man's journey as we continue to explore his character.
Definitely. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll look at how Spider-Man evolves throughout the trilogy, how he learns to balance his need for security with his desire for connection, and ultimately how he embraces his true potential.
Awesome. I'm excited to dig deeper into that.
Me too.
All right, so we've established that Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is pretty much a textbook social six. But how does he actually evolve over the course of the three movies? Like, he can't just be stuck in this constant cycle of anxiety, right?
Oh, definitely not. One of the most interesting things about Spider-Man's journey is that it kind of mirrors the growth that a social six goes through when they actually start to deal with their fears.
Hmm.
In the beginning, he's totally reactive. Like, his actions are driven by guilt and this overwhelming sense of duty to Uncle Ben.
Yeah, it's like he's almost punishing himself for what happened.
Yeah,
He's so fixated on not messing up that he kind of forgets how to actually live.
exactly. But as he keeps facing these crazy challenges, he starts to develop this sense of self-trust. His whole approach to being Spider-Man becomes less about knee-jerk reactions and more about strategic thinking.
So it's like he's learning to use that anxiety in a more productive way. Instead of just waiting for the next disaster to strike, he's trying to anticipate it and maybe even prevent it.
Right. And I think his relationship with Mary Jane is a big part of that evolution, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They have such a complicated dynamic.
Well, you know, social sixes, they really crave connection and belonging, but they're also terrified of screwing things up.
Mm.
So Spider-Man is constantly battling with this desire to be with Mary Jane and this fear that he's going to put her in danger.
I mean, talk about inner turmoil, right? It's like this constant tug of war between wanting love and security and wanting to fulfill this duty to protect everyone.
Yeah, and that tension is something that I think a lot of people can relate to. It's a very human dilemma.
Mm.
We all struggle with balancing our personal desires with our obligations to others.
Spider-Man just happens to be doing it on a much grander scale.
Exactly. And it's not just with Mary Jane either. He's got that same kind of loyalty and anxiety in his relationship with Aunt May, too.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
He's so worried about her safety that he ends up isolating himself, which just creates more distance between them.
It's kind of paradoxical, right? Social sixes, they want to feel connected, but their fear often leads them to push people away. They build these walls instead of bridges.
So how does Spider-Man break out of that cycle? Does he ever figure out how to balance those competing needs?
Well, it's a process. But I think one of the most compelling things about Spider-Man is that he's able to feel empathy even for his enemies, which is pretty rare in the superhero world.
Yeah, he's not just beating up bad guys. He's actually trying to understand them. Like with Norman Osborn, he sees the pain and the internal struggles that led him to become the Green Goblin.
Exactly. And that compassion is a key part of the social six personality. They're always looking for common ground. They want to believe that deep down, everyone is capable of goodness.
It's like they're trying to save everyone, not just from physical harm, but from the darkness inside themselves.
And that's why Spider-Man's relationships with his villains are so interesting. They're not just black and white. There's this complexity to them.
Like with Doc Ock, for example. He wasn't always a bad guy. He was a brilliant scientist who made a terrible mistake.
And Spider-Man sees that. He recognizes the tragedy in Doc Ock's story, the desperation that drove him to become a villain.
It's like he's saying, hey, I see your pain, and I'm not going to give up on you.
And that's incredibly powerful,
Wow.
especially for a social six who's usually so focused on control and order. Spider-Man is choosing to embrace the messiness of being human.
He's realizing that true strength isn't about always being right. It's about being open to different perspectives, seeing the world through someone else's eyes.
And that takes a lot of courage, especially when you're constantly battling your own fears and insecurities.
And it's not just Doc Ock either. Think about Sandman. He's driven by his love for his daughter.
Yeah.
He's not some evil mastermind. He's a father trying to protect his child.
And Spider-Man recognizes that shared humanity, the common ground that connects them despite their differences.
It's like in Spider-Man, the line between hero and villain is kind of blurred. The villains have these complex motivations that you can actually understand and sympathize with.
And Spider-Man himself isn't perfect either. He makes mistakes. He doubts himself. He has his own struggles, which is what makes him so relatable.
He's not this untouchable superhero. He's just a guy trying to figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
And his journey throughout the movies shows that growth isn't always pretty. It's messy and full of setbacks.
But it's also full of triumphs. And I think his relationships are a huge part of that. There's his support system, his reminder of what really matters.
It makes you think about the things in your own life that keep you grounded, the people and the values that give you the strength to keep going when things get rough.
That's a great point. And it's something we'll continue to explore as we move into the final part of our deep dive.
So we've really gotten to see Spider-Man as this complex guy with fears and struggles like anyone else. But before we finish up this Social Six deep dive, I'm curious, what does a healthy, evolved Social Six actually look like? Where does Spider-Man end up by the end of his journey?
Yeah, so remember that growth is always a work in progress, especially for a social six. It's not about getting rid of fear completely. It's more about learning how to manage it, not letting it control every decision.
So it's more about like dancing with the fear, using it as fuel instead of letting it hold you back.
Exactly. And you can really see this evolution in how Spider-Man handles his relationships. At first, he's so scared of losing Aunt May and Mary Jane that he tries to keep them at a distance. Like, if they're not too close, he can't hurt them.
Yeah, but eventually he realizes that to really connect with someone, you have to be vulnerable. You have to let people in, even if there's a chance you might get hurt.
Right. And it's not just about romantic relationships. His bond with Aunt May is so important, too. Even though they have their disagreements, she's always there for him, a source of support and wisdom.
For sure. Those relationships are his anchor. They remind him of what really matters. And I think as he matures, he starts to see being Spider-Man as less of a burden and more like an extension of his love for those people, for his city.
You got it. He's not just reacting to threats anymore. He's actively choosing to protect and serve, to make a real difference.
And it's cool how his empathy even extends to the villains. He doesn't see them as monsters. He sees them as people who've made bad choices, but who are still capable of good.
And that kind of empathy is huge for a social six. It allows them to see beyond the surface level, to find that shared humanity that connects us all, even when we're in conflict.
And it's in those moments that Spider-Man really embodies the best of what a social six can be. The loyalty, the compassion, the belief in the good in everyone. Makes you realize that being a hero isn't just about powers and costumes. It's about showing up for the people you care about, standing up for what's right, offering kindness even when it's hard.
Absolutely. It's about realizing that we all have darkness and light inside us and choosing to focus on the light.
You know, as we wrap up this whole deep dive, I keep thinking about how much Spider-Man's journey reflects our own lives. We all have fears and struggles and times when we're not sure what to do. But just like Spider-Man, we have the choice in how we respond. We can let fear control us, or we can use it to learn and grow and become better versions of ourselves.
I think that's the heart of Spider-Man's story. It reminds us that even ordinary people can find incredible strength and resilience. It's about embracing our flaws and using them to fuel our compassion, our creativity, our desire to make the world a better place.
So, to all our listeners out there, remember, you don't need superpowers to be a hero. What you need is courage to face your fears, compassion to connect with others, and the belief that you can make a difference even if it seems small. And that's something worth thinking about. Until next time.